Gangs are the new law in urban Trinidad and Tobago. Recent incidents of intense violence in Trinidad and Tobago's capital, Port of Spain, have drawn attention to the nation's rampant gang problem. On September 11, the ruthless beheading of a man reported by the police as a warning from gang members exemplified a recent increase in the already significant brutality of gang activity in Port of Spain. There is now a trend towards the so-called South American method of warfare, in which beheadings and other extreme forms of violence are the norm in dealing with rival gangs, and in which only 14.3% of Trinidad and Tobago's youth is confident in its satisfaction with the police force. Additionally, mid-August saw an incident in which 6 people were killed in a 24-hour period in a turf war that drew the level of attention and press focus usually reserved for gang activity in more developed countries. The gang activity in Caribbean nations has largely been ignored, despite the fact that gangs in Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago have become so ubiquitous that they represent a challenge to state sovereignty. Gangs in Trinidad and Tobago, specifically in high-risk areas like the capital and Lavantville, have become so institutionalized that they pose a threat to and even control in some cases the republic's crucial infrastructures. Gangs in the Caribbean, namely in Trinidad and Jamaica, have a very unusual and ultimately far more dangerous effect on their surrounding areas. Regardless of their size, which is surprisingly disproportionate to the measure of their devastating impact, all forms of gangs in Trinidad are more pervasive than those to be found in developed nations and have now become societal institutions that go beyond social purposes, and are coming to resemble governments in and of themselves. A unique organization. There are currently over 100 gangs in Trinidad and Tobago, a small nation consisting of 2 islands and a total population of just over 1,300,000. One of the larger gangs, Jamaat al-Muslimin, is comprised of 600 members under just one unnamed boss. The unusual thing about this kingpin, though, is that he is also the owner of a car dealership, a job which provides a more than adequate living by itself. The explanation for his involvement in a violent criminal organization seems to be that on top of the monetary incentives, gangs afford a level of power comparable to a career in politics, where such groups can be the only source of effective justice and social services for the communities out of which they operate, and as a result crime bosses themselves become a form of community leader. These justice and social services reach surprising extents. 81% of gang members questioned in a survey done by Georgia State University's International Criminal Justice Review reported that their gangs held regular meetings, as opposed to the significantly lower 50% of their U.S. counterparts, but the proceedings of these meetings are what really distinguish them. 6 gang members who have advanced in rank discipline lower-tier members for breaking laws simply because their actions were unsanctioned, often addressing these indiscretions with murder as they would with members of a rival gang. Additionally, in the absence of an adequate legal system, they outsource their justice in situations as trivial as parents disciplining their children. These, mostly, men are as educated as anyone else. 61.9% finished high school, as opposed to 64.2% of non-gang members, get some of their income from legitimate sources, and help enforce community rules. Thus, they are not common street gangs, but rather organized criminal institutions with important social functions. The gangs of Trinidad and Tobago have infiltrated the official government and created an alternative administration, at least in urban centers, of violence and strict order, lacking any semblance of ethics or ability to address welfare. Spoiling social welfare. The structure provided by the highly organized gangs may hint at a mafia-esque, white-collar type of crime, tending to be detrimental mostly to business owners. However, the atypical style of Trinidad and Tobago's gangs inflicts problems upon its society which are above and beyond popular conceptualizations of organized crime. The aforementioned boss has used his status as community leader to authorize many shootings just this month over government contracts. Aside from their violent acts, the organizations take from the needy and control legitimate programs intended to help Trinidad and Tobago's populace as a whole. The nation's Unemployment Relief Program, URP, was created to provide assistance, in a productive way, to those who cannot make a living for themselves by paying unemployed people to perform public service tasks like fixing sidewalks and drains, but even this is believed to be under the control of street gangs and expropriated for crime funding, and a number of homicides have been traced to URP-related conflicts. Unemployment welfare is just one example of a larger trend, where competition for development contracts causes a spike in inter-gang violence. An article published by Stabroek News on August 21 quotes a source nonchalantly mentioning a shooting over one contract and competition for another to build a basketball court on Duncan Street, one of the more distressed areas of Port of Spain, and the location of the 6 murders which spawned the recent official attention to gangs. Any structure that gangs may afford to Trinidad and Tobago is overshadowed by the poisonous effects they inflict on legitimate institutions, as the violence and intimidation that reigns in these urban areas hamper the development of democratic community organizations and, ultimately, the ability of the population to improve their living conditions and social advancement, despite the short-term benefits they might gain through cooperation. Whether or not there are positive externalities, gang culture has turned well-intentioned community programs into fuel for violent power battles between groups attempting to colonize urban centers. Absence of a legitimate government. Almost as harmful as gang activity is the inability of Trinidad and Tobago's government to effectively deal with it. Addressing Parliament's opening session on August. An objective to halt the country's increasing lawlessness. The Anti-Gang Act ultimately hurts much more than it helps. It facilitates mass arrests and the escalation of violence, but not the conviction of large numbers of felons. After the mid-August shootings, police arrested over 100 people, 59 of which were immediately released with at least 42 remaining detained but not under arrest. 13 On top of this, enforcement is mainly being targeted at street violence, which invites police retaliation of the same form. The result is the current dismal levels of confidence in law enforcement among the nation's populace. These anti-law enforcement sentiments are warranted. In Beetham Gardens on September 4, police fatally shot Christopher Greaves, a 23-year-old Trinidadian civilian, an incident of police brutality which inspired citywide riots as the population called for justice. BP, one of more than 20 oil and gas companies operating in Trinidad and Tobago, claims to have shifted its focus from philanthropy to supporting long-term development, building capacity in local non-governmental organizations and community-based organizations through ongoing training, helping them to drive community improvement in their own areas. While the company has created 900 jobs in Port of Spain, programs such as BP's, which in theory could be very beneficial to Trinidad and Tobago, may not be having the intended effect. Hopefully, they will contribute to the formation of the alternative institutions needed to undermine the nation's systemic gang activity. A much more stringent screening process for government contracts and community programs, as well as the creation of alternative institutions for at-risk youth, may help further combat the gangs that plague much of Trinidad and Tobago. Anti-gang legislation is one of the Parliament's main objectives for this legislative session. Whether comprehensive legislation will be passed anytime soon is debatable given the government's shoddy record on the issue, best exemplified by the aforementioned 2011 Anti-Gang Act. Moreover, the government also has to address other internal security-related issues, like police violence and excessive arrests, or choose to innovate on their past action. As it now stands, gangs have a stronger hold on the Trinidadian population than its government does.